Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Real Talk with Rhi podcast. How on earth are you? So today we're going to talk about something that I get questions about a lot, and that is, what is the difference between autism and ADHD? Now this is relevant to me, to my family, because if you're new around here, you may not know this, but if you have been here before, welcome back. You probably already know this, so apologies if we're kind of going over old ground. But if you're new, you may not know. I am Rhi. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host. And I was recently diagnosed with ADHD at age 40. And if you listen to the podcast episodes or you see the vlogs over on my main channel, you'll know I don't have what you'd think of as typical. That's in inverted commas. If you're listening on the podcast, you're not watching on the channel. But I don't have what society generally thinks of as ADHD, which is little boys that cannot sit still and run around like mad. That's the stereotypical, I think, version of ADHD. And that's not how it manifests in women. We will talk about that a lot. But then my children have autism. All four of them have an autism diagnosis. My husband has never been assessed for anything formally, but we have done online what's the best word for it? Online, not questionnaires, more in depth than that, but online tests then, but not formal assessments that have, as we suspected, as I suspected for many years anyway, indicate that he probably is also on the autism spectrum. So he is very much like, what would be the benefit in getting formally diagnosed? But he generally has very similar struggles to the children. Obviously they present in different ways in that he's an adult, but yeah, there are definitely traits there. That's pretty fairly agreed upon within our family. Now, what are the differences between autism and ADHD? Because some of the struggles then can on the surface seem quite similar, and some of the strategies that are put in place can actually help people with one or the other or both, but for different reasons. So we're going to go into all of that today and explain, because one of the reasons I think that this podcast episode came about, obviously I get questions about this, but also through the whole process, I had people say, I've had people for years saying, do you think you have this? Do you think you think you have autism? Do you think you have ADHD? And it's quite apparent. And in fact, I even asked this in my ADHD assessment, and they were quite confident that I have ADHD, and they didn't see any autism traits. So I think people perhaps see certain things that I do in my life to support the children that do ultimately help me and think, oh, well, that must be an autism thing. But it does help me just in a different way. So we're going to start at the very beginning as Maria in The Sound of Music starts. Words. As Maria in The Sound of Music says, that's my tumble dryer beeping. That's helpful, isn't it? We're going to start at the very beginning. A very good place to start with the NHS definitions of both autism and ADHD, just so we can kind of get into the medical definitions before we go into some of the differences and the different challenges that are presented by both. I do want to preface this by saying that I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. If you feel that you or someone you care for has autism or has ADHD, please see your own healthcare professionals. If your children are in school, you can speak to the school teachers. You need to just obviously take what I'm saying and just realise that this is not medical advice. So the little disclaimer out the way. Obviously, I know a fair amount about this stuff coming from a neuro-spicy household, but these are just my own opinions. That being said, we're now going to read from the NHS website about the definitions. So this bit is on the NHS website. So I guess this is medical stuff, but the rest of everything I'm going to say, I just feel I want to say that little disclaimer before we get going. So the NHS, that's National Health Service if you're not in the UK, provides the following definition of autism spectrum disorder, which is also known as ASD. Autism is a developmental disability that affects how a person communicates and relates with other people and how they experience the world around them. It's a spectrum condition, which means that while all people with autism share certain difficulties, their condition will affect them in different ways. Some people with autism are able to live relatively independent lives, but others may have accompanying learning disabilities and need lifetime specialist support. People with autism may also experience over or under sensitivity to sounds, touch, smells, lights, and colours. And as we go through this, I will explain how our family experiences these different difficulties and how that may differ because, as the NHS definition said, then it is a spectrum. So, ADHD. So again, this is the NHS definition of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Try saying that fast. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, is a group of behavioural symptoms that include inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness. Symptoms of ADHD tend to be noticed at an early age and become more noticeable when a child's circumstances change, such as when they start school. We've got some stuff to say about this because this is the NHS definition, but there is a massive wave of women that have gone undiagnosed and, like me, are age 14 going, whoa, do I have this? And then they're diagnosed and they're like, oh, I do. So while it says that a lot of these symptoms are noticed in childhood and these symptoms have to be picked up, these symptoms have to be present in childhood to a degree in order for a diagnosis to happen. But the fact that they're usually picked up, I would have to disagree with that because I think that, maybe they are now. The hope is now, but I know so many people, especially girls and women, are going undiagnosed. So anyway, back to the NHS definition before I disagree with it anymore. The symptoms of ADHD usually improve with age, but many adults who are diagnosed with the condition with a young age continue to experience problems. People with ADHD may also have additional problems such as sleep and anxiety disorders. Okay, so that's what the NHS has to say. So we're just going to kind of take autism and ADHD section by section, and look at how each condition may impact the person. Now, it is a spectrum. So just because one person with autism or ADHD struggles with a certain thing doesn't mean another one will, absolutely. And just because I'm saying something and you're like, oh, I relate to that one thing, doesn't mean you have either autism or ADHD, which is why you'd really need to speak to a healthcare professional. Autism or ADHD are something that you may consider that you may have. With that being said, I have got a printable PDF which you can grab, which again, this is not a medical document, but it's kind of a jump off starting point discussion thing. It's kind of what I wish I had back when my health visitor was talking to me about autism and whenever we had to speak to other healthcare professionals. And I really felt that, I'm going on a slight tangent here, just that this has popped into my head. Perhaps it's ADHD, but this will be helpful if you have any concerns about your children and autism. So they used to say to me things like, do they bring you things? And I'd be like, I don't know, do they bring me things? And I think, well, this is awful. These are my own children. Like, why do I not know these things? Why do I not know if they bring me things? And I used to feel that I wish they'd kind of asked me some questions in advance for things to look out for. So I wish they'd said to me, no, see if you can notice over the next week if your child brings you things to show you, because one of the autism traits in very small children is that they don't bring you things to show you, or that they do the hand over hand thing where they use your hand more like a tool rather than ask you for something. So I used to think, well, I wish I'd known what I was looking for so I could have actively looked for it before this appointment. So I put together this PDF of 100 different autism signs or traits. And like it says in the PDF, it's not a diagnostic tool, but it's kind of just something to make you think, something that's a starting point to discuss with healthcare providers, where you think, oh, okay, maybe they do this, maybe they do that. And some of the things are kind of not repeated, but similar things said in different ways within the document. And it's just a starting point. It's just something to make you think. And there are 100 kind of like very random things that your child may or may not do. And these things are just sad to make you think. Anyway, if you want to grab that, I will put the link down in the description, and then that will get emailed out to you. You can print that off and take a little look at it. And also there'll be some helpful resources to do with autism and our autism journey as a family. things that I've shared that other people have said they're really helpful that will get sent out to you. So all the details of that are found below. Back on topic. So autism versus ADHD. Social interaction. So with autism, there can be difficulties with social interactions. Challenges such as understanding social cues. So that would be not reading things properly. A lot of people with autism struggle to understand sarcasm, may have a very different type of humour, maybe more of like a physical humour than a verbal humour. Making eye contact can be difficult and forming relationships can be challenging. But this is more to do with not understanding the social communication and having difficulties with that understanding. Now with ADHD, there can be difficulties with social situations, but they come from a different place. So it's more like challenges in being impulsive. So people with ADHD may interrupt people and come across as rude. And that's largely because they're like, wow, this thing's just popped into my head. And if I don't say it now, it's going to disappear from my mind forever. And they feel this need to interrupt. And I do this sometimes. And I'm like, oh, don't do that. Or I'm like, they're going, don't interrupt. Don't forget what I'm going to say. Oh, you're not listening to them. So it can be a difficulty with social interaction, not because you don't understand social cues, because if anything, people with ADHD perhaps read into things a little bit too much. I know I do. But social interactions can be difficult due to hyperactivity. And with women, this can often be hyperactivity just within your brain. So I thought that I would be diagnosed with the inattentive ADHD without the hyperactivity. I ended up being diagnosed with, I don't know if they call it both or mixed, because if I'm honest, I was diagnosed, when was my appointment? I think it might have been April. It's currently June. I still haven't had any kind of bit of paper or letter with an official breakdown on it. I must chase that up actually, because after my children were diagnosed with autism, I had like a document that explained not just your child has autism, but these are the specific difficulties, and that was quite helpful. And also, I don't know, I just feel like you need to have something in black and white to prove you haven't made it up just to yourself, if nothing else, So yeah, it will be interesting to see what they send out. And when I get that letter, that document, if I get it, then I will be able to share with you the exact wording of which type of ADHD I have. But I remember saying on the day I just have the mixed kind. So I thought I wouldn't have a hyperactivity kind, but then a friend of mine, incidentally, excuse me, a friend of mine who is a few years younger than me, and was a very good friend, but moved away. But I didn't realise she'd been following what I was just talking about on my channels. And she messaged me and said, oh my goodness, I was diagnosed recently. And, now you're going through it. And actually we're so similar. But she wasn't like bouncing off the walls at all. And she'd said to her consultant, I think she'd paid privately, she'd said to her consultant, well, I'm not bouncing off the walls, I can't have a hyperactivity bit. And he'd explained to her that in women, it's just like, it's your mind is hyperactive, and that's often how it presents. So different difficulties in social cues there. Also with ADHD, sometimes there can be a lot reading into things so much, and that you're almost reading into things that aren't there, and then perhaps thinking that someone is thinking something negatively about you because they've made a face or whatever, but actually it was nothing to do with you, and it's just over analysing things. So repetitive behaviours. Sorry, I'm going to have a bit of a drink. My children are just back to school this week after half term, by the way, as an aside. There have been germs galore in the house. Germs galore. So throat's a bit scratchy. If my voice sounds a bit odd, that's why. Everyone is recovering from the lurgy. So repetitive behaviours. So in autism, people can often engage in repetitive behaviours. So these can be rituals like hand flapping, lining up toys, really preferring very strict and kind of rigid routine. Now, in ADHD, there can be repetitive behaviours, but I feel like they're coming from a different place. So let's take routine for an example. So I have always put routine into my children's lives. I did it initially as a point of automation before I knew anything about autism. So I did it initially. I really lent into routine when I went from having 1 to 2 children. I feel like when you've got 1, you can kind of go with the flow a bit more. You can pass them between you and your partner. You can just say, right, husband, it's your turn for this. I have free time. You can just you can manage it and you can wing it a bit more. So when we just had our eldest, I felt like he was quite portable. We could just up and go. And we didn't have school run times. We didn't have imposed routine. So then when Will was born, I thought, right, well, we've got a certain amount of routine we've got to do. So our eldest had to go to school, had to go to like after school activities at certain times, so therefore he had to eat at certain times. He had to get up at certain times, therefore he had to go to bed at certain time. A certain amount of routine was already there. So I thought, well, we could either lean into this, and I'm talking about when he was really small now, breastfeeding and stuff. We could lean into this, or he's going to be hungry on the school run. So if I'm just like, I will feed my child whenever I want to, which is lovely and is what I did initially with our eldest. But if you're just kind of like, I will feed the baby whenever the baby wants to be fed, you have to be able to stop and feed that baby whenever that baby wants to be fed. And if your school run takes 45 minutes and your baby wants to be fed bang smack in the middle of that, that's not very convenient. So I really lent into routine in that, right, I'll make sure I fed the baby and changed the baby before the school run, and then just it kind of all stemmed from there. Built a routine around the school runs, sleeping at certain times so that they would wake at certain times. Again, I think when it was just our eldest, it's like, so what if they go to bed later? So what if they're up in the night and just sleep later? You can't do that when you've got other children that are getting up. So I lent into routine primarily for ease of making sure that I did not have an upset baby to fit around an older child. And then from there, obviously autism came into play. I mean, autism must have always been there, but I became aware of it. So then I really lent into routine, knowing that routine helped them thrive. Only William initially, because it was only our second child. Initially, I had any idea about. It was of the 4 babies. It was baby number 2, then 3, then 4, then 1 that was diagnosed. It was a funny order. So I lent into routine. And then when baby number 3 and 4 came along, I just lent into routine more. Because I knew that baby number 2 diagnosed with autism, did well on it, but also because I knew it helped me to manage things. Now, for me, do I thrive on routine? I'm going to say yes, but for a totally different reason than my husband and children need routine. So if there are changes in routine for my husband and children, they don't like it. And in fact, even Zara, our youngest, ended up, she was very poorly over half term, and she ended up sleeping in with me and my husband slept in her bed. And then when it came to go back into her room, she was upset because it's not what she was expecting. It's like the new routine had been formed, sleeping with me. And she just said, I just don't like changes. And there was that awareness. We were supposed to be going to IKEA one day, and then we couldn't go again over half term because one of the children was ill. And my husband was just seeming a bit off, a bit grumpy. And I said, well, what's up? And he's like, it's changed some of the plans. I just feel off. And, it's great that they have that awareness to know that that's what that is. But ultimately, he doesn't like IKEA. But the fact that he thought we were going there and then we weren't, he's like, it just makes me feel off. Now, for me, I feel that routine helps me in a different way, and it's more to do with automation. So it's less to do with I need routine to feel settled or secure, I guess, which I guess is like people with autism, or say, I can't speak for all people with autism, but my family members with autism seem to thrive on the routine because it helps them feel, I don't know, safe, secure, like the world's okay. For me, I like routine because it takes thinking out of the process. And because my brain feels so scattered, anything I'm automating, anytime I do not have to reinvent the wheel, it's making things easier. So for example, if we were to eat like certain nights of the week, if you watch my meal planning videos, when I do shop with me in hauls or whatever, certain nights of the week, we tend to eat the same food. And that's not because I'm going to get upset if we don't eat that food that night. Although thinking about it, if I change it and the children are used to eating food on that night, it might upset them, but still. But I know that on certain nights, then we only have a certain amount of time, a very limited amount of time. So for example, there's one particular night of the week where we have to leave at a certain time for an activity, so I can put a pasta bake in the oven and then switch off the oven. And then by the time I do the school run and get back, it's ready for the children to eat. So I know on that night, that timing works. I don't have to reinvent the wheel with that. So for me, that might be a meal that I do on that night of the week every week, not because I rely on it for the sake of routine, but just because it's easier to do that and because I know it works and because I don't have to mentally juggle, right, how am I going to fit this in? It's cooking time, I know it works, and it's taking that thought out of it. And that's the reason I love routine. I love knowing if I do this, then this, then this, I can slot all of I feel like my calendar's like a jigsaw, and it's how many pieces can I slot in? If all the tasks are the pieces, how many pieces can I slot into my day to be the most productive? And for me, routine helps me do that. So the next one would be, we're going to talk about focus and attention. So people with autism can have a narrow focus on very certain niche topics, become hyperfixated on certain things. So you can think little children, perhaps a small child with autism might know like be able to list all the flags in the world, or identify all the flags. I don't know if you can like list the flags, identify all different flags of the world, or know loads and loads and loads about dinosaurs, or just have very in-depth knowledge, more so than other children of their age would, about a certain topic. So for ADHD, it's more like it's a difficulty sustaining attention unless it's a hyper focus. So it's difficulty with being focused on things unless you're really interested in it, and then there's a hyper focus where the rest of the world falls away. So that can look similar to the autism thing with the being very knowledgeable about certain things. It's just, I don't know how to explain it. I feel like my brain can like lock in on certain things and really focus really well, and that's a hyper focus, and other things just feel all like squirrely. Does that make sense? So it's like you can be an expert on things you're interested in because it's easier to lock in on those things and digest them, I suppose. So communication difficulties and differences. There can be language delays with autism, and specifically difficulty with receptive language, so understanding. And I know I feel really bad about this actually. I was a young mum and I was convinced that our eldest had dyslexia. So dyslexia is something I knew about, and he was just really not interested in reading, just really like the cat's like, take it away. As it happens, within a few months he went from I refuse to read anything and I hate reading to reading Harry Potter. It clicked. But anyway, at the time I was like, well, it must be dyslexia. That's why he hates reading. Turns out he just wasn't interested. Probably the books were really boring. But receptive language. So there was an educational psychologist said that there was difficulty. He thought that he had difficulties with receptive language. And I just thought, well, that's nonsense. Because he was very fluent. He must have been, I'm not sure how old he was, maybe 6 or 7. But he spoke like a little adult and had very extensive vocabulary. So I was like, well, that's nonsense. Older me, who now knows that receptive language difficulties kind of fall under the autism umbrella, I wish that person had taken me in hand and gone, no, you don't need to, I need to explain to you more what this means so that you can realise your child has this difficulty. At the time, I just thought the guy was talking rubbish. I'm going to be honest. And I wish someone had talked to me more sensibly about it. I mean, I guess I wish I'd had the knowledge to go, oh, okay, I should look into this a bit more. But I didn't know then what I know now, and I'm going to avoid shoulding all over my past self because it won't actually get me anywhere. So ADHD people with ADHD tend to have less severe language difficulties, but may struggle with impulsivity in conversing and interrupting, talking excessively. So it's like, perhaps people with autism may struggle with communicating, whereas people with ADHD may have the tendency to over-communicate, which may be a difficulty. People with autism often have difficulties with loud noises, certain sensory things, like my children hate scratchy labels. Most of them generally are not bothered by loud noises. They're pretty unbothered by loud noises, which I've always put down to them living in such a noisy household. And in fact, it's quite interesting that our eldest, who's now in uni, was never bothered by loud noises, just never. And now when he comes home, he's a little bit like, wow, it's loud here, because he's just not used to living in a really noisy household, which is kind of says something, isn't it? Like, our household is noisier than a student house, but apparently it is. People with ADHD can have these sensory issues, but as a rule, they're not as pronounced as the difficulties that people with autism may have. As a rule, obviously, it can vary a lot. Emotional regulation. So people with autism can have difficulties regulating their emotions, which often manifest as meltdowns. And meltdown, compared to a tantrum, I would personally define as, let's just use an example. So if your child wanted this, it's a scrunchie, I don't know why they want that, but if the child wanted this and you're like, no, you can't have this, we need to do something else. And then they're like, but I really want this. And then they start having a tantrum. If you were to say fine and you hand over the thing they want, then the tantrum would generally stop. It's not something I'd advise doing because then they're going to learn that if they have a tantrum, they're going to get what they want. But if you were to be like, fine, go on, there you go, with a tantrum, it would resolve. With a meltdown, I feel like, go on, then you can have this, you can have 10 of these. It's like it's got to that meltdown stage. That won't be enough to solve it. It's like it's gone beyond the thing you're asking for. It's like, I was asking for this thing, and this is why I've had a meltdown, but now you've given me this thing and I'm still upset because I'm in the middle of a meltdown. And it's like a full multi-sensory overload experience, which takes quite a while to come out of, which I would say is quite different to a tantrum that a neurotypical child might have. With ADHD, there can be, just due to the nature of the like very busy thoughts and things, there can be more kind of emotional outbursts, but they don't tend to become prolonged meltdowns because the sort of hangover from meltdown can last a long time, hours. People with ADHD tend to just not present in that way, in my experience. So executive functioning. Autism can have challenges with executive functioning, including planning, organisation and flexibility of thinking. So people with autism can often struggle to see things beyond the way that they perceive them. There are difficulties with executive function with ADHD, affecting tasks like time management, awareness of how long things take, prioritising and task completion. So if you've seen my office tour on my YouTube channel, I guess. I'm not sure if I showed my clipboard stuff in my last office tour, but basically I have got, in order, because I know I struggle with this, so this is before I was diagnosed with ADHD, I knew I struggled with how to order and prioritise things. So I've got a calendar for all my content within Airtable, which is like a content management thing. And then I have a clipboard, like so. A clipboard with a piece of paper like this. This is the one for what I'm supposed to be filming now. And I've got like the working title of it and the date I'm filming and the date I'm publishing the content. And then up in front of me, but like behind you, I've got hooks on the wall and clipboards, and I arrange them in the order that they need to be done. So I sit and go, right, okay, which order all these videos need to go out? And I sit and do this in one hit. And then all I know when I sit down, I'm like, what should I be doing? I'm like, I start with a clipboard over there and I work along. And I've set this system up for myself because I know sometimes I could waste so much time sitting down at my desk being like, what am I supposed to be doing? And which order am I supposed to be doing things? And I could spend ages doing something that's seemingly unimportant, but I'm like, oh, this is totally important, but actually it's not urgent. The other thing I find really helpful, I designed in my own planner because I knew that I need this. And this is an Eisenhower matrix. So if you just write a to-do list, the easiest way to tick off loads of things and get that dopamine hit is to just pick off the easy wins. But those aren't necessarily the things that need to be done. So within my planner, I've got this Eisenhower matrix, which has got things that are important, not important, urgent and not urgent. And when I write down my to-dos for the week, they're categorized like this. And I really have to decide what needs to be done in which order. And then I allocate tasks as to what I'm supposed to be doing each day, the top 3 big tasks I need to get done each day. And if I sit and plan that out on the weekend, I'm so much more productive. And I just know, and now I know it's ADHD, but I now know that if I don't do that, I end up wasting so much time just wondering what I should be doing. So, motor skills, apparently, according to the webs, people with autism may have motor coordination challenge or exhibit stereotyped movements. So I guess, does this impact my children really? I would say not in a big way, no. And then with ADHD, motor coordination issues can present but are not as central to the diagnosis as in autism. Motor skills, I would not say have a big impact on anyone in my family. It doesn't mean it's not relevant to other people with autism or ADHD. Hyperactivity. So if hyperactivity is present in autism, it's usually related to sensory seeking or specific interest rather than generalized restlessness. So stimming. Now, our youngest flings herself at the furniture. I always used to put this down to a stimming thing, but now I am wondering if she perhaps has ADHD as well. She has a lot, the more I've learned about it really from my own experience, my own diagnosis, I've learned so much over the last few months, the last couple of years, but really the last few months about ADHD, especially in girls and women. And I think that our youngest probably has ADHD as well as autism. And one of the big things is how she literally, we call her Tigger or Sonic the Hedgehog, she just bounces off all the furniture all the time. And she's like, I really can't help it, mummy. And I actually believe her. And while there are kind of perhaps some stimming things, like, well, when he was small, he doesn't do it now, but when he was small, he used to spin a lot until he was dizzy and then fall over. He'd spin and then fling himself. And he did it once and cut the top of his eye open. But that wasn't, I feel like, an ADHD thing. That was like a stimming thing. Zara, probably ADHD as well. But overall presentation. So we've got autism is characterized by a broader range of symptoms, including social communication deficits, restricted interests, and repetitive behaviors. Whereas autism is primarily recognized by symptoms of inattention, so daydreaming, not being able to pay attention and focus, hyperactivity and impulsivity, but without the same level of social communication challenges as autism. So someone might have some of these signs and just have autism. Someone might have ADHD. Some might have both, and someone could be neurotypical even though they're showing a few of these. So really the important thing to do is to speak to your healthcare provider. But if you are curious, did my child have autism? I need to know more. Do visit the link down below and grab that PDF, because it's just designed to be something that makes you think, because it's some of those things that were said to me that were like, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that was related. Yeah, they totally do that. But if the healthcare professional hadn't said specifically, do they do this thing, I never would have brought it up. Whereas you might notice some things on there that you want to take to a healthcare professional to give weight to your argument. Because I know as a parent, when you're trying to get your child assessed, sometimes you've got to really fight for it. You've got to make sure that you're believed by the healthcare professionals, and it's awful. You shouldn't have to fight like that. But sometimes you feel like you've got to arrive with evidence in order to get past certain gatekeepers. And I've experienced this in various degrees throughout my kind of journey with the children. But sometimes you'll meet certain gatekeepers that are like, nope, not enough evidence, bye-bye. Whereas actually, if you'd said a few things that they do, it's just you didn't realise it was relevant to bring up, then you would have been able to get past that gatekeeper. So hopefully that document, that little PDF printable, will be of help. So thanks so much for tuning into another episode of Real Talk with Rhi. I hope that was super helpful. I'd love it if you would rate and review if you're listening on your podcast provider. I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel. If you are watching on YouTube, it really helps support the channel. And I shall see you guys in the next one. Bye.